Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephen Bartkus, the curator of the Gunn Historical Museum. Thank you for joining us for tonight's presentation, Siddons Mowbray and the American Renaissance. The beauty and tranquility of Washington have drawn and nurtured the creative spirit. From the town's beginning, artists and writers found both inspiration and a welcoming home here. This evening, Josephine Rogers, our distinguished guest, will be illuminating the life of Siddons Mowbray. Jean Solomon, a trustee of the Gunn Memorial Library and Museum, will be introducing her. During this lecture, which is being recorded, we ask that you please mute both your audio and video settings. If you have questions, you may submit them throughout the lecture in the chat box feature, and Josephine will answer some of them at the end. Now, I'd like to hand it over to Jean Solomon.
Hello and good evening. My name is Jean Solomon. It is my great pleasure to welcome our guest lecturer, Josephine Rogers, the Marcia Brady Tucker Senior Fellow, Department of American Paintings and Sculpture at the Yale University Art Gallery. She earned her PhD from Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey in 2015, focusing on 19th century American art. Since September 2018, she has been working closely with Mark Mitchell, the Holcomb T. Green Curator of American Paintings and Sculpture, coordinating details for the gallery's upcoming exhibition on the American Renaissance and also researching the Edwin Austin Abbey collection. She has held positions at the Freer Gallery of Art and Arthur M. Sackler Gallery at Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., the National Gallery of Art, also in Washington, and the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York City. Thank you, Josephine, for your participation here this evening. And now I'll hand this over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me. And we will begin. Thank you. Hold on. There we go. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak this evening. I am honored to participate in this lecture series and to discuss my current research on the American artist Siddons Mowbray, who rose to prominence at the end of the 19th century. Mowbray first arrived in Washington, Connecticut in 1898 to find solace with his family from the impediments of summer heat in New York City. In 1907, along with his wife Helen and son George, Mowbray established year-round residence and a prominent role in the cultural community of Washington. Helen passed away in 1912. The following year, Mowbray began a ceiling mural depicting the myth of Proserpine at the entrance of the Gunn Memorial Library in her honor. Shown here on the right, I hope everyone can see. The mural was recently restored, and this evening I would like to discuss the painting within the context of the artist's career and offer some perspective in how we can further appreciate the work today, both virtually and in person. Henry Siddens was born August 5th, 1858, of English parents in Alexandria, Egypt. His father died of hypothermia before he was a year old. His mother, Eliza Siddens, made the decision to move to Pennsylvania to be with her sister Annie, who was married to chemist George Mowbray. Professor Mowbray devoted his career in the 1850s to refining petroleum, which he believed, though dangerous, was the superior luminant when compared to whale oil. Tragically, on a winter evening when Harry was 5 years old, his mother made the mistake of pouring a can of petroleum or oil onto the fire in their home. The can exploded and she was burnt to death. Annie and George Mowbray adopted Harry, and he became Henry Siddons Mowbray. After the Civil War, Harry entered West Point, but left before completing his first year to pursue a career as an artist. In 1878, at the age of 20, Harry moved to Paris and met a group of American artists and fellow students, including Edwin Blashfield, Carroll Beckwith, and Augustus St. Gaudens, with whom he would collaborate with for the rest of his life. In 1886, the young painter moved to New York. Small canvases such as the harem scene that we see on the left today at the Metropolitan Museum of Art were popular for New York collectors and allowed Mowbray to establish a career while teaching at the Art Students League. In 1889, collector Thomas B. Clark offered Harry Mowbray his first commission for a decorative mural painting, a panel 3 feet by 6 feet to be displayed in the mantel at the New York Athletic Club's reception room. This sparked a passion for the artist. At the turn of the century, Mowbray became a leading academic muralist who believed that ornamental painting and sculpture could serve to improve American taste. Preferring the title mural decorator to that of mural painter, Mowbray completed numerous private and public commissions during this period, which has long been described, including in its own time, as the American Renaissance. This evening, I will survey the history of this first mural movement in the United States and Mowbray's role in promoting American civic art. Mowbray adopted his academic training to combine new and traditional techniques of mural painting by activating an intimate experience for his audience. Art critic and friend Royo Cortizas once owned the drawing on the left entitled Drapery Study. He admired Mowbray's poetic ideas, his sound workmanship, and his ability to incorporate pictorial compositions into their architectural surroundings with what he called classical grace and restraint. This study beautifully accentuates Mowbray's skill and delicate touch that can be hard to appreciate in his murals because of the scale or installation. I believe this figure was drawn not to be replicated in one specific project, but instead it captures the control and balance of the artist's drawing technique. It is a practice study. The movement in the fabric, ever so slight, reveals the model's body beneath. In person, the texture of the robe is so fragile, it gives the impression that the image itself floats and the drapery clings to the model's thigh only for a brief second. Mowbray brought a level of discipline and perceptiveness to each commission that distinguished his works from those of his peers. A comparison of a series of murals he designed for Callus and Arabella Huntington in New York City and the Gunn Memorial Library mural of the same subject reveals the variations within Mowbray's work and his significance of the American Renaissance. The photograph shown here on the top left documents a banquet given in Mowbray's honor in New York City on May 26, 1888. Notes on the back identify the collector Thomas B. Clark is speaking. The room is full of fellow students from Paris and leading artists in New York, including Carol Beckwith, William Chase, William Coffin, Kenyon Cox, Thomas Wilmer Dewing, Augustus St. Gaudens, and Julian Weir. This network was crucial to Mowbray's career and defined the American Renaissance. The term American Renaissance came into usage in 1880. Historians have continued to use the term to describe the period between the nation's centennial in 1876 to its entry into World War I in 1917. In an era of idealism characterized by national self-confidence and industrialization, American artists and patrons sought to place the United States as a cultural culmination, the modern era of Greek democracy and Renaissance humanism. In a rush of the post-Civil War construction of Capitol buildings, courthouses, libraries, train stations, art museums, and other palaces for the people, painters and sculptors of the late 19th century and early 20th century tested their talents in a range of large-scale projects. Mowbray and his colleagues shared a profound faith in progress and the potential of art and education to elevate the human condition. As creators of the idea of the American Renaissance, they fused a cosmopolitan awareness of social conscience and a new spirit of reform. Mural painting in the United States reached a zenith in 1893 when American artists decorated the most prominent buildings at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. More than 27 million people visited the exposition, almost half of the population of the country. The fair's architecture and atmosphere marked a new age. Architect George P. George B. Post, designed the Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building, one of the most celebrated buildings at the exposition. So here on this slide, I've just collected 3 images of the building. The clearest one is probably the one in the middle, but I wanted to give you a sense of the surroundings. It was actually adjacent to the main center, the Court of Honor, to the left, and then to the right, this is actually the opening day ceremony for the fair, and it just shows you the scale of the building. In a letter to the Director of Works for the World Columbian Exposition, George B. Post explains, in quotes, "It has been decided that the work should be pure Italian Renaissance. The form of the triumphal arch for the central and corner porches and all of the repeating arches found in the Roman aqueducts seem to meet all of the requirements," end quote. To accentuate the arches, Post commissioned a group of artists to create murals within each of the domes, highlighting subjects associated with manufacturing and the liberal arts, while also inspired by Italian art. Edwin Blashfield was invited to create a mural for the Southwest Pavilion. An image of the final mural is depicted on the upper right. As a scholar of Italian art, an art critic, as well as a painter, Blashfield's writing simultaneously promoted and defined the American mural movement. Unfortunately, the black and white image here is the remaining record of the mural. We can assume that from Blashfield's other commissions that the colors would have been vivid, the drapery accenting the placement of the figures and the arts they represented. Drawn from models, the figures reflect individual expressions, yet ordered and symmetrical, they function solely to accentuate the architecture. And here I've just quickly added this slide to comment that there were women also created murals at the World's Columbian Exposition, but they had they were throughout the fair, but the largest concentration was in the actual women's building, and Post did not recruit any female artists for his projects. And here in his own words, I quote Blashfield, quote, "Mural painting may safely be called the most exacting, as it certainly is the most complicated form of painting in the whole range of art. Its scope includes figure, landscape, and portrait. Its practice demands the widest education, the most varied forms of knowledge, and the most assured experience," end quote. And historian Louis Dinerstein further described this period by saying, quote, "Despite its limitations, the American Renaissance has left a rich legacy. It was the first period in which American art was fully comprehended as part of a world culture. As a concept, the American Renaissance encouraged artists to strive for their most fully developed expression and fostered the establishment of art-filled public places, as well as a sensitivity to the relation between art and environment, both structurally and socially," end quote. Mowbray made the decision not to contribute to his work to the World's Columbian Exposition because he had already begun a commission of 19 lunette murals for the New York residents of Callus and Arabella, Huntington. And so on this slide, I have on the right, the Gunn mural, and on the left, I have 3 images that you'll be seeing throughout the lecture. I hope you recognize the drawing on the bottom left, and the detail is actually of the Gunn mural in the center. And right now, we're going to be kind of looking closely at the top left, which is a detail of the Greek goddess Proserpina when he first paints her for the Huntington ceilings. The Huntington ceiling paintings provide an important link to the public murals of the period and offer an exceptional insight into the rarefied domestic taste, bringing life to New York society so vividly captured by Edith Wharton and Henry James. The Huntingtons would have entertained guests during various intimate social engagements within these spaces, enacting the rigid the social codes that Edith Wharton criticized and defined in the Age of Innocence. As part of the performed rituals, the subject and style of the murals invites the viewers to imagine that they are occupying the same expanse as the figures. The railroad magnate Callus Huntington purchased land on Fifth Avenue after his marriage to his second wife, Arabella. The Huntingtons commissioned the affirmation, George B. Post, the distinguished pupil and associate of famed architect Richard Morris Hunt, to build a new mansion that would establish the couple's prominence in New York society. Surpassing even the enormous residents of their neighborhood, most notably the Vanderbilts, the overall layout focused on the domestic life rather than entertaining large groups. There was no ballroom or picture room. Callus reported to the New York Tribune that the intention is that every room in the house will be occupied by the part of the day by the family. So here we have portraits of Callus and Arabella, and on the bottom right, I have a floor plan of just showing you Mowbray's murals were for the areas in red, and the other artists were highlighted in yellow. Throughout New York City in the 1890s, Arabella Huntington's interior design decisions and social engagements were measured by Alice Vanderbilt's high standards. The Cornelius Vanderbilt second mansion, or the Cornelius Vanderbilt II's mansion across the street on Fifth Avenue, it was across the street from the Huntington Mansion on Fifth Avenue. And it was completed in 1883 with an expansion in 1894. And it was labeled the grandest house in America. Unfortunately, both buildings were destroyed in the 1920s to make space for the commercial retail space on Fifth Avenue. But this is just to show the neighborhood, and again, a reference to Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence. Reflecting the current vogue, George Post chose a heavy Romanesque masonry for the Huntington Mansion. And even though it was not the most distinguished structure on Fifth Avenue, the interiors were opulent with rich displays of white and colored marbles, stained glass, oil paintings, tapestries, and ceiling paintings. Of note, Mrs. Huntington chose to employ a group of American artists to paint the murals throughout the first floor instead of turning to the French artists as was the precedent. Augustus St. Gaudens recommended Mowbray to Post for the project because he knew the young painter wanted to pursue a career as a mural decorator. While in Chicago during the fall of 1893, Post hired Edwin Blashfield to paint a mural for the parlor, shown here on the left, and Elihu Vedder to design a mural for the dining room, shown here on the right. Post then also hired Francis Lothorpe to complete murals for the music room and the main salon. Mrs. Huntington approved each artist's individual mural schemes with the intention to create a harmonious environment throughout to capture the imagination of the upper class society. Blashfield followed the Italian master Tiepolo by depicting a sky full of celestial beings and large clouds in the first floor parlor. Vedder's allegorical figures of virtues and fortune were stylized and represented modern allegories. Lothorpe captured Diana in the heavens for the ceiling of the main salon. Mowbray was the only artist to have two separate series, creating a suite of muses of modern America and resurrecting the legend of Persephone, which we will discuss shortly. Set in the main hall shown here, Mowbray produced 9 large lunettes depicting modern allegorical female muses. As Amy Torbert has shown, this series was a definitive departure from his easel painting in scale, color, and subject. In each canvas, a female figure reclines adorned in exuberant drapery against a greenish gold background. The 9 muses served as an ideal framework to honor modern achievement by innovating new designs while not straying too far from the classical idiom. No records have survived of the exact titles for Mowbray's murals. In 1897, he did identify the subjects of 7 of these 9 lunettes, including music, literature, tragedy, comedy, astronomy, painting, and electricity. With electricity, shown here in the upper left, Mowbray elevated contemporary electrical innovation to the realm of the muse. In 1892, when Mowbray was developing the murals, friend and colleague Carol Beckwith produced 5 allegorical figures representing the arc light, the Morse telegraph, the telephone and the ticker, the dynamo, and the spirit of electricity for an archway in the Manufacturers and Liberal Arts buildings at the World's Columbian Exposition. On this slide, I have included an oil sketch of the figure representing the telephone and the ticker. In this comparison, the artist's motives differ. For Beckwith, the female figure embodies the power of technology, being empowered by the telephone and the ticker machine. The technology shapes society and changes people's lives. Mowbray's embrace of technology is much more personal, showcasing a single light bulb and a battery capable of producing only a limited amount of energy. For Mowbray, the batteries and the wire he depicted were not just symbols of modernity and technological process. His adoptive father, George Mowbray, was actively involved in development and patenting of electrical devices in the 1870s and 1880s. As an artist, Harry had an intimate knowledge of the equipment he was depicting. The two jars on the lower left that you see in the slide, hopefully, depict a galvanic battery, and the shape of the light bulb in the Muses' hand recalls Edison's 1880 bulb. Professor George Mowbray died of the flu epidemic in June 1891, only a few months before Mowbray began working on this project. By referencing older technologies, Mowbray is commemorating early pioneers and inventors, including George Mowbray. At the same time, he's memorializing the tragedies or the dangers of earlier experiments with luminance, similar to which killed his mother and led to modern innovation. In addition to the 9 lunettes in the main hall, Harry Mowbray created 10 smaller lunettes for the first floor corridor connecting the main hall to the east salon, or the main salon. And again, I'm just bringing up the slide on the floor plan to see. This is just the narrow corridor in red. Mowbray's series, now part of Yale University Art Gallery, depicts partially draped figure. The surviving installation photos are shown here on the left. The floor plan on the right highlights the corridor in red, and the image on the lower right is Lathorpe's ceiling for the salon, entitled Diana and Her Attendants Among the Constellations. Mowbray's series, now part of the Yale University Art Gallery, depicts partially draped figures suspended in ethereal spaces surrounded by clouds. In the original installation, each canvas was encased in a lavish gold frame along the corridor. The softly illuminated sky animates a narrative of loss, celebration, and the cycle of the seasons. There are no records to document Mowbray's creative process or that describe the subject of these lunettes. Richard Murray was the first scholar to identify the image on the top right as a scene depicting the Greek goddess Persephone being abducted by Hades. In the Greek myth, I will quickly summarize here, Zeus decides that his daughter Persephone, the goddess of fertility, will marry Hades, the god of the underworld. Hades then abducts Persephone while she is picking flowers. Persephone's mother, Demeter, goddess of harvest and agriculture, was unaware of Zeus's plan. She became distraught as she's searching the earth for her daughter, thus causing a famine. After Demeter encounters the mortal Triptolemus, she decides to teach him how to sow crops to save man. Zeus recognizes her efforts are not enough, so he sends Hermes to the underworld to save Persephone, and eventually Demeter and Persephone are reunited. Unfortunately, Hades tricked Persephone, and she ate pomegranate seeds, which sealed her fate to stay in the underworld forever. After Zeus Demeter is enraged and threatens that nothing will grow on Earth again. After Zeus steps in, it is agreed that Persephone can return part of the year, thus creating autumn, winter, spring, and summer. Upon closer examination of Mowbray's murals, only 4 of the figures are conclusively connected to the classical Greek myth. Of the remaining, 4 appear to be personifications of the seasons, and 2 are heralds celebrating the moments of the year. The Romans also worshiped this Greek myth, and the ancient Roman goddess Proserpine, later Proserpina, became a popular icon similar to Persephone. During the Italian Renaissance, artists captured the terror and drama of the narrative in murals and sculpture. On this slide, the titles have been attributed to the Roman gods. For example, Ceres is instead of Demeter, and Mercury instead of Hermes. To keep the structure of the narrative, Mowbray also depicted Triptolemus, and so it is interesting that he's referencing both the Roman and the Greek. And I believe that he would have coordinated the subject with Francis Lathrop, who depicted the Roman god Diana for his mural in the Salon. If we return to the Harvard Art Museum's drawing, I believe this study does give us insight into Mowbray's creative process. The smaller lunettes are similar in scale to his easel paintings. And here is another Destiny from 1896 that's now to MFA in Boston. And with the comparable size and the technique, we can clearly see here that the delicate gestures of his brush articulated in graphite in the drawing are replicated in oil, and the female bodies throughout the series are grounded in, help ground the narrative. So it's a repetitiveness of having the central female form in the center of the lunette, and it kind of connects all of them, and that's how we kind of know that the story is unfolding in a certain way. But the big question is, would the Huntington's guests immediately recognize these, the Greek or Roman, this Greek or Roman myth? For the privileged New York audiences invited to both the Vanderbilt and the Huntington's events, the subject would have been recognizable. In the 1880s, while working for Cornelius Vanderbilt II, George Post hired American artist John Lafarge to serve as a supervisor for the interior decoration of the Fifth Avenue mansion. This included designing stained glass windows and painting certain less prominent mural schemes himself. Limited only to the watercolor room, originally treated as salon adjacent to the dining room, Lafarge developed a series of female figures to be positioned along the side walls. The subjects included Flora, Aphrodite, and Proserpina, as well as personifications of the senses. Due to a contract dispute, the original design was not completed. Francis Lathrop, Lafarge's student, improvised a new scheme to complete the decoration. The final design was well received because during the expansion of the mansion in 1894, the entire ceiling was moved and reinstalled. And here we have the original way it looked in 1883 on the top, and then at the bottom you have how it was then recreated in 1894. A drawing of Lafarge's figure, sense of smell, can also help us, shown here on the right in color, can also help us, and here's a detail of where it was positioned in 1883, can help us imagine the color scheme and the outline of the female figures. Francis Lathrop was, in 1894, was also working with Mrs. Huntington while coordinating a ceiling mural for the main salon of her mansion. Mowbray would have been working at the exact same time, and his subject matter, the muted pastels of the murals and the looser painterly style, complemented Lathrop's style. For fashionable New York audiences, the Greek myth was also given a fresh new perspective in 1889 when Alfred Lord Tennyson published Demeter and Other Poems. Tennyson's poem, Demeter and Persephone, is a dramatic monologue in Demeter's voice. It is no longer a story about Demeter, but by her. Most significantly, the poet chooses to begin the poem with reconciliation rather than abduction and loss. The first 51 lines of the poem find Demeter reunited with her daughter, conscious of her victory and aware of the beauty which has been restored to the natural world, conscious, that is, of rebirth, which, with reconciliation, is the center of the new mythic statement. If we return to the Huntington Mansion, I would like to offer a new arrangement for the inspiration of Mowbray's smaller lunettes. The abduction is positioned here to the lower left, the abduction is positioned directly across from the return, which is the upper left, suggesting the two starting points for the myth. Mowbray then repeats the structure of the main female figure, adorned with narrative details and engulfed in a beautiful glowing light, surrounded by flowers. Images of the seasons and heralds are spaced evenly throughout, punctuated by the events of the narrative. For Tennyson and Mowbray, the original Greek and Roman myth, which had placed reconciliation as just a simple event, has now become a reconciliation myth, in which the seasons become complementary to the spiritual victory. Proserpine rises from the dead and is a sign that love, Proserpine or Persephone, rise from the dead is a sign of that love can overcome death and gain immortality. The members of New York society would have seen this as a present possibility. They would have that would have been reached in the fulfillment of time. This period was full of enormous sense of optimism, and Americans could produce optimism in the sense that Americans believed they could produce a world so spiritually coherent that the natural world and the divine order could be in perfect harmony. And now we're going to move on to a decisive moment when Mowbray actually visits Rome, Italy for the first time. And here on this slide, I have an image of his first library that he completes, which is the University Club Library, and then J.P. Morgan Library in 1905, and then we have the Gunn Memorial Library. And above that is just a snippet from the Borgia apartments that he visits at the Vatican. And so just to give you a sense, I wanted to introduce the slide before I started. During the American Renaissance, expressive possibilities of the human form were explored in a way that had never been seen before in American art. Mowbray himself grew tired of the photographic realism of the academic French school in which he had been educated. In 1903, after receiving the commission to design murals for the University Club in New York, Mowbray traveled to Rome, Italy for the first time. In his memoir, he describes, quote, "I paid an early visit to the Vatican to overlook the Borgia apartments, which suggested so much the type of work that I am about to commence. I knew it well in black and white and had studied it closely in all its parts. Nevertheless, I was surprised and thrilled when I saw it in color. Nothing could exceed the richness and the beauty of the low-key tonality. I may say the same thing of its design and the manner in which the minor details are carried out. It is perfection as mural decoration. Judging it as a whole, its gravity, its repose, made an ideal type for the walls of a library. Guards brought me a ladder and I spent a good deal of time studying the walls closely," end quote. The initial concept for the University Club Library was to copy the lunettes from the Borgia apartments. By the time he arrived back in New York, it was understood that he would modify the subject and design with the understanding that the Borgia apartments represented distinctly the type of decoration the University Club and Mowbray desired. Mowbray followed the University Club with a prominent commission to create a mural scheme for J.P. Morgan's library. Mowbray's decorative scheme incorporated two series of figure representations of muses and their attributes derived from the Church of Santa Maria del Popolo in Rome, alternated with cultural luminaries of the past. In the lunettes, above the great men, signs of the zodiac are presented as their corresponding muse, accompanied by their ruling deities from the Roman calendar. The structure modeled after a series of murals from the Villa Farnesina in Rome that corresponded to the owner's horoscope. Here in this instance, Mowbray incorporates the same design to correspond with the constellations visible in J.P. Morgan's horoscope, with certain special exceptions. For example, Aquarius, the sign under his first wife, Amelia, who died in 1862, is adorned with two scenes: Pluto abducting Proserpina and Mercury rescuing her. After concluding his trip to Rome in 1903, Mowbray returned to Washington, Connecticut to one of the worst winters ever recorded. In his memoirs, he described the joy of arriving in Washington after a long journey and the purity of the white snow. When Helen passed away in 1912, Mowbray chose to paint a mural at the Gunn Memorial Library in her memory. When one talked with Mowbray about the painting, he would say in his quiet way that he had simply joined with his neighbors in doing something that he might hope would rather make the community a more pleasant place to dwell. Architect and friend E.K. Rosser described the Gunn Memorial Library mural as an antechamber of Greek mythology, and compared Mowbray's vision to that of the Taj Mahal for creating a masterpiece that symbolized his love for his wife. The painting is a stunning example of his mature mural style, and fitting that he returned to the subject of Demeter and Persephone, or Ceres and Proserpina, to commemorate his love. I hope by now you know these characters, but in this iteration, the myths of winter is depicted by Pluto's abduction, juxtaposed by spring and Mercury's restoring the goddess, and then personifications of fruits and flowers or summer is juxtaposed to Ceres presiding over vines and grains or autumn. Details of the landscape beautifully suggest and correspond to each season of the year. The schematic drawing on the left is a lantern slide that was projected onto the canvas when painting the mural. Mowbray outlined the drapery and described the hairstyle of the figure so that he could paint the details in correct proportion. This process is, as Stephanie Wiles discusses, this process is illustrated in the middle of the slide by a publication of an image of Edwin Blashfield's studio in 1897. And so I was able to track down this drawing, and I think it's a wonderful example of how his process, that what we're seeing is that he would project the image onto the ceiling and then paint in the details. And so again, this idea that I feel so much of the figure comes out because he really has such a gentle brush. And here Mowbray respected the curve and flatness of the ceiling surface. The rich blue background forces the figures to the front of the picture plane and maintains the decorative, delicate, linear qualities of their forms. Manipulating the traditional format of the sculpture bas relief, and the figures retain the suggestions of three-dimensionality. So finally, Mowbray resourcefully reuses his studies. It has not been possible to confirm the exact date or title for the Harvard Art Museum's drawing. When compared to the Huntington murals and to the Gunn Memorial Library's mural, it personifies Mowbray's gentle nature and delicate touch. The figure of Persephone in Washington is a culmination of his previous work and part of himself, representing the love of his wife, Helen. And finally, I'd just like to kind of wrap up by speaking for a few minutes about the murals that are at St. John's Episcopal Church, just down the street from the Gunn Memorial Library. And examination of Mowbray's work with E.K. Rosser in relation to Italian art allows for a new creation of his ambition and the struggle of artists face to shape a visual language that can stand the test of time. And I think that there is a moment where so much of his work in what we're referring to as American Renaissance in the earlier period was really the cooperation between artist and architect. Which during the American Renaissance, up to the years of the First World War, was kind of the growing sense of art in the United States. And then with the entrance of the Bauhaus-inspired architecture and modern art, this kind of broke apart, this kind of collaboration. And I truly feel that one person that he really connected with in Washington was Rotzer, and the two of them collaborated so beautifully in the church, and you can really see that he's returning almost as the pre-Raphaelites had in England to a period in Italian art that's preceded the Renaissance in the sense of what I'm describing as humanism, or the kind of lusciousness of his female forms, that here it's much more religious based, and it's they're clearly flatter, and the gold, they're almost Byzantine kind of figures. And so I think that this was one of his last projects, and I think at the time he did live long enough that he experienced the end of the American Renaissance. And I think that Connecticut really became a place for him to still appreciate and to still find that community that he had really grown to love in New York with the other artists that I had mentioned. So I hope that this was kind of brings everything together. And I think that this is definitely worthy a place to end, to show his skill as an artist, but then also how much he really did aspire to and appreciate Italian painting, and how much he wanted to bring that into the United States. So thank you. And quickly before I end, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone that has supported my research at Yale, including Mark Mitchell, Cindy Schwartz, and Stephanie Weil, who's still there, but then also past fellows and past curators, Amy Torbert, and then former curator Helen Cooper, because in this time of COVID, their research files were so helpful, even just pulling together the images for this presentation. And so thank you so much.
That's absolutely fabulous, Jody. It's just wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful to hear you listen. And I think to put his paintings into context, and we really don't see that. We haven't seen that here. So you really opened our eyes to that. We have a question here from Sally, who says, not only designing, but did he actually lie on his back and paint the ceiling murals? And then were any of the murals at the Huntington house saved?
So I did have to edit it out, but luckily the Huntington Mansion, when it was torn down in 1926, Archer Huntington, the son, both can, I guess I should start over, I apologize. So all the murals are actually done on canvas. And so they were drawn kind of in the studio, similar to if we see Blashfield's studio here. So they would be against walls or down on the floor. He would paint them all not in situ. And so when the Huntington mural was torn down, they were able to just cut out the murals. And Archer Huntington actually gave almost all of the murals to the Yale University Art Gallery. And so one thing I would love, I forgot to say this to them, but if you want to go see the larger lunettes, they are actually, unfortunately, the gallery's closed right now, but we hope to reopen before Thanksgiving. And you'll see the large lunettes are in our permanent American galleries.
Thank you. Here's another question. How did you personally become interested in the work of Henry Siddons Mowbray?
So I was born in Boston and I lived there till I was 10, but then when I was in 4th grade, I moved to Scarsdale, New York. And when I would travel into the city, we would go through Grand Central and reading, the literature, Edith Wharton and all of these times, I just became so intrigued by this period in American history. And Mowbray I found through the Morgan Library, but then also coming to Yale for this project, Yale has been one of the leading institutions to support this type of research and to really spend the time and energy to conserve these works. And so it's been just a really fun process to get to know Mowbray, because unfortunately there isn't just one. We even mentioned this before about putting together a bibliography for people. There's not really a book on him, or there's not really a place to go to kind of get the full story. So even tonight, this was just such a fun project to kind of really think about how his different projects interact with each other, because that really hasn't been talked about yet. So.
Terrific. Dimitri has a comment. Dimitri is saying the process shown in the slides using projected drawings is exactly how my father painted the mural in the bank, and
Oh,
the one has all the original sketches up for that. So I
oh,
think,
that's great.
yeah.
And so Blashfield, as I mentioned before, I did quote him, but this image was published in Harper's Weekly in November 1897, and it was with a complete article of like how to do it. And this was what he's illustrating and talking about. The Waldorf Astoria used to have this in the ballroom. There used to be Blashfield murals. They're since been taken out, but this was he was kind of showing the public this kind of the behind the scenes of how he actually does this, and so it is. I think that's wonderful that it was kind of taken, and it was they did teach. There were the Cooper Union in New York did teach mural painting.
That's
at the turn
fascinating.
of the 20th century.
Yeah. So all artists leave a piece of themselves in their work. How would you describe what Mowbray left of himself in his paintings?
Well, I think just working on this project, like I think the image here of the goddess coming back to earth, he really is just, it's so delicate. Oh, sorry. It's so delicate, and there's so much kind of life in her that he, that you could really see how much he cares, and that's really a piece of him.
So I think that's very interesting, particularly in light of the gift of painting the ceiling in the Gunn Memorial Library. It has all to do with his first wife. And you earlier made a comment that, love will conquer death, or it's
like an immortality, that she's really there. And I think so much of the attention that he puts on this one figure is a culmination of like all of the different women, or, and I tried to show it in a way that, I think that she was so part of his life and career. And in his memoir, when he's describing his travels to Rome and all this stuff, she's with him the entire time. So I think that that's kind of how he's bringing it together.
So beyond that, and maybe along the same line of thinking,
oh, sorry, Joan, Jean, you're muted, sorry.
So along the same lines, well, the question is, do Mowbray's paintings display distinctive signature elements, such as maybe symbols or images that he repeats in his paintings?
Well, I think that after he comes back in 1903, and he spends so much time at the Vatican, really trying to emulate the style that he's seeing. I think that really does become his signature. If you do take the University Club, the Morgan Library, and the Gunn Library, there is like the background that we see, there are similar motifs, but just even how he breaks up the canvases, and I think that there is a lot of similarity there. It becomes unique for him. And I do think that so many of the artists of this period, their styles really do evolve in different ways. And, he was finishing the project at the University Club when JP Morgan popped in and saw it and was like, okay, you can do this. So much of their commissions and their projects were because of the networks that I was talking about before, of their friendships, and they were kind of doing what needed to be done at the time. And so I think that I'm not quite sure how much of his, because University Club specifically gave him the instructions to go and copy it, and then he was the one that felt that because of the space he needed to alter it. so I think so much of what I describe as his signature mature style of mural painting is really indicative of this idea of the library space that he really connects with in a way.
Thank you. Here's a comment from David. He says, I have a Walter Russell painting on a wall here. There is Washington, Connecticut connection to Russell. Are you familiar? Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not. I apologize.
Okay. Another comment here, there are many public buildings from that period with murals, thanks to collaboration between architects and artists. So another comment here, his work reminds me of that of the sculptor, Daniel Chester French.
Yes. And they were, they had a, I mean, that's because they really were around at the same time, and
it's was a friend.
Yes, no, and that's why, I mean, in terms of they, yes, and one reason why they come to Washington is to find kind of a summer, because Daniel Chester French had Chesterwood, and so I think that they were trying to seek out a similar kind of community, and they came and found that in Washington.
So a question, how is the representation of the Muses in his laureates, or I guess it's lunettes, yes, different from other artists' representation of the Muses, from any period?
So I do talk about that a little bit, but so the biggest thing is just what he decides the attributes he assigns to them. And in the longer version of this talk, I did go in a little bit more detail, and I'm sorry I kind of cut it out. I mean, my point for this talk was really to show how the electricity really had a personal it was a way for him, one of the first ways that he connects with possibly like his George Mowbray, but then possibly even his mother, in terms of seeing it as like I do think that with each project he saw it as his legacy. So this was a way for the Muses and his ideas to kind of be in New York for eternity. No one kind of then thought that the mansion would be torn down, so soon, in a span of like 3 decades. But in terms of what he's really looking at is, if we think of Michelangelo or the Sibyls of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, a lot of these kind of women were shown to kind of accentuate a certain emotion or a field or an act. And it's just interesting that I tried to pair it with Beckwith, who was looking at the exact same sources, and these were 2 examples how both men kind of depicted them so differently. So there are some others, just I don't find as compelling, or that they knew each other as closely as Beckwith and Mowbray did. So that's why I brought in that comparison.
Here's a question from Joyce. What media is used for the ceiling paintings at Gunn Library, and how have they been maintained over the years? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, and I can find that out. But what's interesting, I think, to me, is that just reading that question it seems to me that some of his paintings were painted on canvas and then applied, to those lunettes or inserted. And then some were painted directly on the walls, or the ceiling surfaces. Maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah, no, all of the figures that you're seeing are on canvas. The impasto he did separately, but there's no case that I knew that he actually drew on the ceiling or painted on the ceilings.
So that's interesting because that would answer a question
Oh, okay.
earlier. Is he lying on his back?
Oh yeah, no. They're in a studio similar to what I showed with Blashfield, that he's projecting on them in his studio. He's painting them on, and that's why with the smaller lunettes, there's, to my mind, he's like the image here on the top left. It's so much more painterly and it's so much more kind of, the richness to it is really similar to the easel paintings. And this was really his first major series, which he then is really trying out. Like, how can I create a series with a similar, in each the pairs of the lunettes at the Huntington Mansion, the female figure is the center, and then he kind of revolves the narratives around them. And so that's what I think is the real takeaway in terms of how he's evolving his style, because that's very similar for his paintings, his easel paintings.
Actually, Stephen Barkus has a comment, and going back to Walter Russell, he said that Walter Russell lived in a home designed by Eric Rossiter, 143 Roxbury Road in Washington. And he says he thinks at a minimum Mowbray and Russell likely knew of each other.
Oh, I'm sure. And there was definitely a community. And then Mowbray actually had some role at the library in the 20s as well. I think that his connection with Rossiter, it was also I think that was kind of his center, or what really why he loved the cultural community in Washington.
Yeah.
And it sounds like he was supportive to artists and stuff. I mean, when critics and friends write about him, the word that keeps coming up is like gentle and really kind of a wonderful collaborator. And that's another reason why I tried to show the photograph from his papers, was to show that these were really people that he studied with when he was 20 and he worked with his entire career. So I think that, and again, his connection with Augustus St. Gaudens, their networks were so large, and they, and one example of another project I'm doing research on is when the Library of Congress wanted to complete the murals or create a mural scheme, they kind of sent it out to certain people. And, we just have, because it's the federal government, we have all the letters and you can recreate these networks. And I think Mowbray was a key kind of collaborator in that. And he does seem to have enough commissions that he was working continuously. And he was the youngest. I didn't add this, but I would say that he was a good 15 to 20 years younger than than the others in who contributed to the World Columbian Exposition. So he was seen as the youngest, or the younger generation. And so he, the respect and his momentum really took off after 1893, when projects started getting recognized more.
Another question, did Siddens Mowbray do any murals for John Howard Whittemore of Naugatuck, who sponsored a lot of McKinley and White buildings in Western Connecticut in 1870 to 1910, in that period?
That would be something to, I would have to double check that. But that would be exactly what his name was probably mentioned, at least, if he did not, or they could have. Yes, that's exactly kind of his circle.
Okay. Another question. Well, the museum does have photos of several photos of Mowbray. So we're getting close to the end here, but here's a question, and it's attempt to bring, I guess, Mowbray into the present, and what can we learn from him that we can apply to our lives today? So, there were messages of patriotism and citizenship that were implicit in all of the public art and architecture of the American Renaissance. And do you see potential opportunities, say, for artists to express these messages today?
Yes, and I also think that, well, to begin with, I think that so much of this mural, the meaning behind it and kind of just experiencing it, of going to the library and, you know, it's supposed to reveal itself over time. And I think that's something that these artists really took to heart, was that their messages were something that were going to last as long as the marble in these buildings. And so there is a sense of time, nature, the seasons. And I think that today, there's also a sense that we need to take a moment and think about kind of how we interact with our spaces. This was before the modern architecture. This was before so much. There was really this belief that if you introduce people to art in public, in certain ways, that it would enrich their lives, calm them from the stresses, and help bring them or educate them to a certain level of being an elevated type of human being. And I also think that there is a way that they were trying to connect people, and they were trying to have a shared community, and from that create a more cohesive American culture. And they had always, you know, gone to Europe and seen these great monuments and seen these wonderful civilizations, and there was really this momentum that America was going to be that, or that it was that, and the civilization was there. But they needed to have these beautiful buildings or these beautiful spaces to then feel that cohesive connection. And it happens differently. I think Mowbray also does a mural for the appellate court in New York around this time. And unfortunately, I had to take it out of my presentation this evening, but he really does a whole mural on the importance of Roman law and truth. And, you know, these are all concepts that that's what the fabric of society is. And I think today we need this more than ever, is to really kind of think about these issues, think about nature, think about our world around us and how we affect things. But then also it's a way of really bringing, because so much of the projects that in the American Renaissance were efforts after the Civil War and during Reconstruction that weren't actually funded until the 1890s. And so if we think about that time period, and we think about kind of how can public art bring people together and really have us consider the world around us and consider ourselves part of a larger American culture, or in our time, I think that that's exactly how we should be thinking about this. And this is a history that's really virtually been forgotten or, you know, wiped aside. But I do think that there is a lot of merit in bringing about these conversations, and, you know, really talking about American history, New York history, you know, Washington, Connecticut history, of how these communities were really, and these artists were thinking about kind of the future at that time.
That's tremendous. That's excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jody. This has been wonderful. I think it's on the face of it, I think that we've had such good participation and lots of interested people, a nice turnout, and also lots of good questions. So we can't thank you enough. This is
Thank you. Thank you.
Really delightful. So all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.